Welcome to a special breaking news episode of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, May 1st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 122 days, the game against Michigan in 213 days. And for the fourth time this spring, an Ohio State football player has entered the transfer portal. This time it is veteran offensive lineman Enokk Vimahi. Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com joins me. Tony, this is one where he kind of fits the profile of the guy who you would expect to go in the transfer portal. Veteran, longtime contributor, but didn't feel like he was really in the mix seriously to start this year. And it feels like going into your last year, you'd want to go somewhere you could potentially start. So this one did not exactly shock me when it came across.
No, this one was one that had been expected. As you said, fits the profile. Going into his sixth year and was running with the threes this spring, had been passed by second-year guys Luke Montgomery and Austin Siereveld at guard, third-year guys like Carson Hinsman and Tegra Shabola as well. So plenty of guys ahead of him at that point. So, yeah, this one makes sense. And you think back to a year ago, when Justin Fry was saying that Enoch Vimahi had been like one of the five best in the spring and they were going to have to find a way to, figure that out. He might be in the starting rotation, and you see what has transpired since then. But a guy who played 38 games in his Ohio State career, started twice. Neither of those starts went particularly well. Last year in the Cotton Bowl, 2022 against Michigan, he was replaced pretty quickly, but a veteran guy that had been, guarded, played some tackle even a little bit in his career, but one of the top recruits in his class, but just could never quite put it together at Ohio State.
Yeah, he was someone who it feels like for 3 years we've been talking about, and maybe Enokk Vimahi being in the mix on the offensive line, and he was always kind of in that sixth or seventh or eighth kind of best offensive lineman, where you felt like he was probably in the circle of trust, but never, outside of a couple individual games, was never a starter. And, I'm sure Ohio State fans right now all they're going to remember from his career of those 38 games is the Cotton Bowl against Missouri, which very much did not go well. And, that's probably not fair to him because he was a very solid contributor for a number of years. That is, of course, going to be the last impression, and that one's going to linger, I think, in a lot of people's minds. It is interesting what his departure and the fact that he was running with the threes this spring, what that maybe says about the offensive line on the whole right now, as well as what the offensive line was when he was coming in. Because you got to remember, when he came in, he was one of those few guys who was not an early signee. So he was a February signee and was not someone Ohio State had a ton of contact with before early signing day. And in that class, that was still when Greg Studwara was at Ohio State, they were really short on offensive linemen. The room was really thin. They desperately needed more people. And Enokk Vimahi flew in from Hawaii in January, visited Ohio State. And, when you were one of those few guys in January, you become a very hot commodity. And Ohio State desperately wanted to add him to that class, ultimately did end up adding him to that class. But, I think it's, in a way, Tony, this is probably an indication of progress for the Ohio State offensive line, that you had someone who you desperately needed and who was kind of perpetually knocking on the door and now has maybe slid down a couple rungs down the ladder. Maybe that's not such a bad thing for the offensive line room on the whole, because to me that suggests maybe the overall level of talent is, taken a little bit of a step up in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and we remember the concern in Ryan Day's voice last spring about how the Buckeyes and the offensive line left things and what they needed to do. And Enokk Vimahi was one of those guys in that top six probably at that point. And then now to essentially probably not even be in the top 10 speaks obviously to Luke Montgomery, Austin Siereveld, as I mentioned, just those two guys specifically as second-year guys moving into the ones and twos. And however that shakes out, maybe they'll both be with the twos this year. But that's ahead of where Enokk Vimahi was this spring. And really, Tegra Shabola, Carson Hinsman in that situation as well. just this boundary that Vimahi wasn't able to get through because of those younger guys stepping up and playing well. We know offensive line is a developmental position where you're not really worried necessarily about somebody until, can you start contributing on a 2 deep as a 3rd-year guy and then maybe become a starter as a 4th-year guy. Yeah, you have some advanced guys that move quicker than that, but really that's kind of the progression that you expect. And so to have these 2nd and 3rd-year guys doing that, I think that speaks very well of the future and also the present of the Ohio State offensive line. You also still have the portal. I mean, you bring in Seth McLaughlin, that makes things even more difficult to find playing time. But overall, a good sign that a 6th-year guy, if a cold thing to say, a good sign for the Buckeyes that a 6th-year guy has decided to move on. But in terms of there really is no playing time, no playing option for him because there are so many younger guys that are apparently better options at this point.
And, you would hope that he can go find a good spot to play because he was, you never heard bad stuff about him. He's not a bad kid. He was not, he was a hard worker his 5 years at Ohio State and was always kind of there ready to step in as needed and played, on special teams and all that kind of stuff. So it's not, I think this is very much going to be a wish him well kind of situation. You hope he goes and finds a spot where he can get on the field. This is, I think there were a lot of people who were expecting, and I will raise my hand and say, I was expecting more transfers in the post-spring game period. So far, there have only been 4, Vimahi, Dallin Hayden, Cedric Hawkins, and Jihad Carter during the spring window that closes on Tuesday night. So it is not officially closed yet, could have more. But I think to me, Tony, the relatively quiet spring portal is maybe reflective of 2 different things. Number one, you've got an Ohio State team that is expected to do pretty big things this year, so hanging around for another year might not be bad if you have that option. And number 2, we always do these, where are they versus the 85 scholarship limit thing. And it just feels like with as much turnover as there has been with the transfer portal after the spring, after the season, and then, they have not ever brought in these enormous classes. We will probably do a where are they compared to the 85 limit show at some point, but it has felt for years like they're always at 88, 89, 90, 91 at this time of year. And it's like, well, someone's going to have to transfer. And you have those hard conversations. It feels like with as much turnover as there is in the portal after every season, you're really not getting into the point where you're at 89, 90, 91 right now, because Ohio State is pretty much always going to lose more guys. You're going to lose quantity and bring in quality where you're bringing in Caleb Downs and Julian Sayin and Quinshon Judkins and guys like that. But you're almost always going to be losing more guys. It feels like this quiet spring portal window for Ohio State might be a little bit reflective of that new reality of roster management.
Yeah, and I think even we don't know how many guys are technically on scholarship because they don't tell us unless they tell us, and they don't. But assuming all 3 specialists are on scholarship, going into Monday, I had the number at 85. So you add Jihad Carter and you take Jihad Carter, you take Enokk Vimahi off, you're down a couple. That's not the worst thing in the world. You can give guys scholarships and things like that, but it's a little bit different than what we've become accustomed to. It does give them conceivably room to bring in people if they want, but at this point, there's really no need to chase anybody off at this point, because especially a 6th-year guy, like somebody in their last year, like you're not trying to make up room for next year because that guy's going to be gone. But you don't necessarily have to boot anybody out right now. Like I said, you even have conceivably room to bring people in if you want. We've seen in the past where, we're at 80, 88, 89, so some guys have to go, and that's not the case right now. And it's probably an interesting feeling like, hey, we've got some room. What do we want to do with this? And is there anybody out there? Where do we need it? And, that's a topic for another day maybe, but it is the fact that we haven't seen as many, I think, should knock wood at this point, because who knows how many are going to come in the next I don't know, 12 hours or whatever. But I think we all expected more. And I think there are a number of good reasons why we haven't seen that. And for each specific player, it might be a different one of those reasons. So I don't want to generalize all of these things, but certainly these things came with a lot of thought, like, should I go? Should I leave? What's better out there? Can you leave at this point and go find a position that is going to provide more playing time? I think that's also a question.
Yeah, for sure. Is there a place where if your primary goal is I want to play, then can you find a place where you can play? And I know there's lots of people are very concerned about tampering and all that kind of stuff. There are ways to have those back channel conversations and probably have a sense for where you might be able to land before you take that leap into the portal. I would guess that some of those conversations have probably been had for a lot of guys this spring at a lot of programs. So we'll see if we're back with another one of these a little later on today. As I said, the transfer portal deadline coming up on Tuesday night. May have another one or two, or maybe done for the portal. That's the fun of the portal. You never know. So we will be back. We'll be back with plenty more content this week, whether it's portal related or not, at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That's where Tony, Kevin, and I cover the team. Mark covers recruiting. Got our whole team of X's and O's gurus making you a smarter football fan. We're at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle as well. Make sure you find us there too. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.